My name is Cynthia Belzel, and I am the Operations Officer at RBJ Software. RBJ has gone through the SSAE 16 audit process and has achieved our Type 1 and Type 2 report. During this process, we have learned of other companies in the escrow and title industry that have also received their SSAE 16 reports. Because of this, we have received many inquiries asking what exactly is an SSAE 16, and we are being asked if escrow companies, in preparation for CFPB's requirements, have to go through such an audit. It is not the position of RBJ or SSAE 16 professionals to say if you do need to obtain an SSAE 16. Our goal here today is to simply provide you the information you need to help you make a business decision as if that is something that you would like to pursue in the future. RBJ has found great benefits in going through this independent audit process, and that is something that I will share with you a bit later during the presentation. But as far as the nuts and bolts of what an SSAE 16 audit is and how it might benefit your company, the SSAE 16 professionals are much better equipped to cover that. With over 30 years experience in governance, risk compliance, related services, Jim Jimenez is proficient in internal audits and has planned and directed numerous SSAE 16 and SOC 2 audits. Jim also spent 8 years working in the lending side of the industry. And while SSAE 16 professionals offers other types of services, Tim Bronsovich is the SSAE 16 practice leader of the company. So with that, I turn this over to Tim and Jim, but before I do, I want to quickly point out that on your webinar toolbar, you should see an area for questions. Should you have any questions during this presentation, please write it in that area and we will address them a bit later in this presentation. Okay, gentlemen, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia. If you could just transition us over to the next slide, that'd be fantastic. So as Cynthia mentioned, the objective of the webinar is to provide information about the SSAE 16 audit and how it relates to compliancy requirements for the escrow and settlement industry. And I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, and Cynthia, thank you for hosting this. We really appreciate getting in front of these folks and giving them some good information about the audit and how it could benefit their operations. So with that, let's talk a little bit about SSAE 16 professionals. As you see here, we were the two founders, Tim and myself, were former Grant Thornton professionals, and we branched off from Grant Thornton to focus really on performing these audits, these SSAE 16 audits, for the small to mid-sized market firms. And fortunately, we've had some great success and been able to not only work with hundreds of small to mid-sized companies, but we're also working with several very large multi-billion-dollar organizations and the U.S. government. The next slide, the next bullet point here is we are PCAOB registered, which means that the PCAOB stands for Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. And what that means is that if any of you have publicly traded companies that go through an annual financial audit, their auditors can rely on the SSAE 16 audit that we perform. What it also means is that in addition to the regular peer review that our firm goes through every 3 years, we also go through a PCAOB peer review every 3 years. So it's a classic case of the auditors getting audited and getting a taste of our own medicine. So as a firm, we decided to specialize in the SSAE 16 and the SOC 2 audits. So we do not do any financial statement auditing or tax work. We focus purely on these particular audits. And in doing so, we've been able to land and be successful in working with clients all across the country, and many of those clients also have international locations which we have had to visit. Lastly, what I'd like to mention here is, as a firm, we also decided that we wanted to make sure that all of our professionals had a minimum of 10+ years experience. We've all been in the large CPA firms in the past, and we've seen where, you know, some of the firms will put people not far removed from taking final exams out of college, learning on our clients or their clients' dimes. And so this is a way for us to really go out there and do a very efficient job for our clients, and it results in less internal resources on their end as well. So with that, if you can switch to the next slide, Cynthia, that'd be great.
In regards to the SSAE 16, it always helps to know where you've been to know where you're going. So you may have heard, you will hear many acronyms on the call today. One of them is SAS 70 that you may have heard in the past. And SAS 70 is sort of the predecessor to the now SSAE 16. SAS 70 follows a lot of the same rules that the SSAE 16 followed, with some various differences that was brought to the change when the SSAE 16 came live June 15, 2011. But as you can see, the SAS 70 started in operation April 1st, 1993. And on slide 5 over here, what you'll see is that the SSAE 16 essentially took over June 15, 2011. So the SAS 70 is no more. If you ever hear anybody ask about a SAS 70, just know that no longer exists today. The SSAE 16 is also known as an SOC1, a Service Organization Control Number 1 audit. So if you ever hear SSAE 16 or a SOC1, SOC1, just know they're synonymous. They mean exactly the same thing. Next slide, please.
Okay, so let's talk about the types of SOC audits or Service Organization Control audits out there. There's a lot of ambiguity about this. You know, what's a SOC 1 versus a SOC 2, or a Type 1 versus a Type 2. The key point to note here is for either audit, the SSAE 16 or the SOC 2, there's a Type 1 and a Type 2. So what are the differences between the Type 1 and the Type 2? The Type 1 covers a period of time, a point in time, whereas the Type 2 covers a period in time. And the difference between the SOC 1 and the SOC 2 is the scope of the audit. So the SOC 1 really covers internal controls over financial reporting, whereas the SOC 2 covers the 5 different trust service principles, being security, confidentiality, privacy, processing integrity, and availability. So it's very difficult for folks to understand and remember what's the difference between these two. So we like to use the letter S for SOC. Just think of the scope of the audit, the letter S, scope of the audit. So does it include internal controls over financial reporting or not? The letter T is the time period that's covered during the audit. So if it's just a point in time or a snapshot, that would be a Type 1 audit, and the Type 2 audit covers a period of time. Now, the Type 2 audit is really the standard, or the gold standard audit, if you will, that the external auditors will be wanting to see companies perform, because what it does is provides credibility that the controls have been operating effectively over an extended period of time. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the SSAE 16 audits. And as we had mentioned before, they are specifically focused on internal controls over financial reporting. The one key point to note is that this is very different than a financial statement audit. So it's not a financial statement audit. And we had mentioned earlier in the broadcast that we only focus on these types of audits. We do not do financial statement auditing. These audits also cover a myriad of IT general computer controls, as well as business process controls around the services that you offer to your clients. A key difference between the SAS 70, which Tim talked about previously, and the SSAE 16 is the SSAE 16 audits, they are risk-based audits. So it's not one of those audits where you can cherry pick controls and you know, pass every control because you've cherry picked them. We really have to address the risks associated with the services that your companies provide. And then we will also address industry-specific controls, as you see here, EIC and ALTA. All right, next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about SOC 2 audits. There's been some discussion in the marketplace whether or not escrow companies or title companies need to perform the SOC 2 audit. And the SOC 2 audits, as you'll see here, they do not focus on internal controls over financial reporting. What they really tend to cover is more of the trust service principles that you'll see, the security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So there's a lot of concern out there over information security and whether or not there's proper controls to protect companies from hacks and things like that. We've heard about these in the news time and time again. And so the SOC 2 audits do cover, they go about a mile deep into security and availability, processing integrity, and each of these other trust service principles. But we like to believe that the SOC 1 audit can really be the de facto audit, because within the SOC 1 audit, not only are you covering the business process controls, but we will also cover those controls that relate to specifically security or any of these other trust service principles. We'll dive into those controls within the SOC 1 audit. So with that, I will, if you can change the slide to slide 9, please.
Excellent. So the impact of the CFPB requirements. Now, some of you may deem the acronym CFPB as a curse word, and to those of you who do, I apologize in advance. But we all know that the CFPB has come out with some guidance, specifically Bulletin 2012-03, Service Providers. And that really impacts the lenders or the supervised banks and how they manage their third-party vendors. So you see the trickle-down effect, what's occurring in the marketplace right now. The CFPB has issued the bulletin, which trickles down to the lenders. Now, the lenders are trickling down requirements to their third-party vendors, for example, title and escrow companies. What's important to note is that title and escrow companies are not being picked on by the lenders. We receive phone calls all the time from a myriad of organizations who do business with large banks, credit unions, who are third-party vendors and are being asked to undergo the SSAE 16 audit. For example, document destruction companies. And bizarrely enough, we received a phone call from a company who actually builds credit unions. And you say, why would a construction company need to undergo the SSAE 16 audit? And we, in fact, asked the client, why is the bank forcing you to do this, or the credit union? And their answer was, the credit union is making all of their vendors, irregardless of what services they perform, if they're a third-party vendor, to undergo the audit. So we can see that trickle-down effect is occurring in the marketplace for the past year or so. And it's definitely picking up speed in the title and escrow industry. Next slide, please. So we see another couple acronyms and the frameworks specific to the various industries in this space. So for the escrow industries, we see the EIC model policies and procedures, and in the title space, we see ALTA best practices framework. And what I think the EIC did, which was very important, is to say, hey, we're separate and distinct from title companies, and therefore we should have our own framework. I think that was a very good move, because what it allowed is the EIC to develop policies and procedures that are very specific to the escrow industry. You can't really apply a one-size-fits-all approach to this, so you really can't put a square peg into a round hole, which is why the EIC came out with their own framework. So we'll dive in a little deeper into the EIC model policies and procedures. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are the 6 sections of the EIC model policies and procedures. And think of these sections as high-level control objectives, or simply put, areas of risk which are trying to be mitigated by undergoing some sort of compliance initiative. So within these 6 areas, there'll be a myriad of other controls that we want to identify within each of these areas. So for example, under licensing, there's procedures around establishing and maintaining applicable state licenses, establish and maintain compliance with all applicable licensing, registration, for state regulatory departments or agencies. So those are the real nitty-gritty details that we want to dive into and meet, establish controls to meet those compliance requirements. So within each of these, there's a subset of controls that will be identified and therefore audited.
So Tim, regarding controls, I know we're going to talk a little bit about controls down the road here, but a lot of people might be wondering, what do you mean by a control? What type of controls could we have around licensing? And what comes to mind is, to me at least, is that there's some type of a procedure or an individual within an escrow company that really, that's their job, is to determine, and they have a spreadsheet of some sort that says, okay, we need to make sure that we're licensed in these particular states, and these are the expiration dates, and somebody monitors that. So that is a really good example of a control around the licensing aspect.
Great point. Great point. And similarly, that's a good control that is likely going to be in place across the board at all escrow companies. Now, what's important is that if you choose to undergo the audit, the CPA firm that's performing the audit does not take a one-size-fits-all approach. Companies are different size, varying degrees of complexities within the company. So if a CPA firm comes in and they walk and they talk like a robot, and they try to apply a standard set of controls across the board, irregardless of what you do specifically in your own control environment, that can be dangerous. It can add cost to the process. It can add cost to your overhead. It can be very dangerous. So it's important that each company that undergoes this has a very customized approach for their specific operating environment to ensure that not only do you meet the compliance requirements, but you also do something that's customized for your business and you're not doing too much or too little. Next slide, please.
Okay, I'm going to go and switch to the next slide, but I just want to point out as we're going through these acronyms, for those who might not be aware, EIC stands for Escrow Institutes of California, which is a governing association for independent escrow companies that works directly with the Department of Business Oversight. And ALTA refers to American Land Title Association. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yes, great point. And for those of you who have likely heard of the ALTA Best Practices Framework, as you'll see here, there's 7 different pillars that make up the ALTA Best Practices Framework. And since most of the companies on this call are escrow companies, we won't dive too deeply into these different pillars. But very similarly to EIC, the 6 sections in EIC, what you'll see is within the ALTA Best Practices Framework, again, you have these high-level 7 control objectives, if you will, and below each of those control objectives, you have to identify controls to meet that control objective. Next slide. So what we have done here is really compare EIC to ALTA, the 2 frameworks, one for the title industry and one for the escrow industry. And as you'll see, they line up very nicely, for the exception of ALTA number 5, because pillar number 5 is strictly pertaining to title company procedures, not escrow company procedures. So you'll see the 6 areas that make up EIC also nicely align with ALTA. And I want to point out here that this red font here, number 5, the privacy policy, and number 3, information and data privacy procedures in ALTA, those 2 are highlighted in red. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But I want to point out that we also say sometimes companies undergo the SOC 2 to meet this particular pillar. So that's what some companies have done. They perform the SSAE 16 for the majority of the pillars for the areas, and the SOC 2 for one specific pillar or area. And we'll dive in a little deeper and really provide our guidance on what we think is the best approach going forward. Next slide, please. So again, for those on the call today, choosing the right framework is critical to your success. You don't want to choose the ALTA framework if you are an escrow company because, of course, ALTA deals with title companies. So the EIC is our recommendation if you're an escrow company to follow those model policies and procedures. If you're a title company, we recommend following the best practices framework for ALTA. But it's important to note that the controls will be customized based on the services you provide to your clients. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we're saying the SSAE 16 and the SOC 2. Which audit should you choose? And I think it's important to note here that there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. And quite frankly, many lenders, and also the CFPB, and even many folks on this call, it's a confusing subject matter. They hear these acronyms thrown out. They hear recommendations on do this and do that. But truly, a lot of folks don't know which audit to choose. And they don't know the key differences between the various audits. So it's extremely easy for lenders or for CFPB to say, okay, do both audits. Do the SSAE 16 and do the SOC 2. And that can be very dangerous for those on the call. And it's important that business owners and CEOs and presidents of companies understand the differences between the audits because it allows you to better manage your business, really know and educate yourself on which is right to undergo because costs are an important factor in any decision you make. The last thing you want to do is undergo both audits if you don't have to. So as we see here, some companies are choosing to perform both. They're getting either advice from their CPA firm or reading up some guidance online, and they're saying, okay, it's recommended we do both, so we'll do both. However, we do hundreds of these audits a year. We know the small intricacies involved in each of these audits, and quite frankly, we take pride in educating our clients and educating the marketplace. What you'll find here is the SOC 2 that we talked about in the previous slide, covering EIC number 5 and also pillar number 3, we had that SOC 2 highlighted. And those are the areas that are being covered within the SOC 2 audits. All other areas were being covered within the SSAE 16 audits. Now that is not a cost-effective approach to the audits. Obviously, you're doing 2 audits, increases the level of efforts involved in performing both of those audits, and therefore your costs do increase. No doubt about it. So unless you're being absolutely forced to perform both audits, our recommendation is to only perform the SSAE 16 audits. By doing the SSAE 16 audit, it's a very flexible approach to performing the audit. The SOC 2 is very rigid in what's covered, very linear. The SSAE 16 is much more flexible in how we approach the audit, how we establish controls, and you can actually reach and achieve all of those control objectives and risks, mitigate all those risks within ALTA Pillar number 3 and EIC number 5 within the SSAE 16 audit itself. You do not have to do the SOC 2 audit to achieve all that, especially with some changes that have recently occurred within the SOC 2 audit by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. They rolled out some new rules. So it would really increase the cost even more by doing the SOC 2 audits. So our recommendation is the SSAE 16 is the compliance vehicle of choice. Now, perhaps an even more important question here, not which audit to choose, but quite frankly, you're wondering, do I have to even perform this audit?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we get this question all the time. And a lot of the client prospects that we speak with on the phone, we call it the chicken and the egg theory, and they tell us, well, we don't really want to do the audit until we have enough clients to support it, or until we have a client that is requesting the audit. And then the others say, and we don't have the cash flow to support the audit. And the reality of it is, in my 30-plus years of auditing internal controls and doing various types of audits in my career, this is really one of the only audits that I've ever seen that has a fantastic return on investment. So, and we had a client actually in Texas It was a smaller startup data center in Dallas, actually, and he was very concerned about making an investment for the SOC 1 audit when he really only had a handful of clients. And he felt that yeah, after he took a look at it, we talked with him, he said, geez, you know what, if I'm going to make an investment in anything, I'm going to make an investment in myself, in my own business, in my people, my employees, my family, etc. So he actually decided to perform the SOC 1 audit. And as a result, he went from one location to 10 different locations in a span of about a year and a half. And so what he experienced in performing the audit was, it was a great return on his investment. He was investing in himself, and really was creating more opportunities for his employees and prospective employees out there. So he, after engaging our firm to do the SOC 1 and experiencing such tremendous growth, he figured, you know, if I invested in myself once before and it was a success, why not invest again? That's when he reached out to us and asked us to perform the SOC 2. Now, they're a data center, so the SOC 2 is different for data centers than it is for escrow companies. But he engaged our firm to do the SOC 2, and he has just experienced a tremendous amount of growth. So if the question out there is whether or not we do this audit at all, just remember those types of stories, because we've got a ton of examples like that. In fact, Tim, I think you've got another example from another client or two here.
Absolutely. And so the answer is, do I have to do this audit? Absolutely not. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. You have your own free will. You can choose to do it or you can choose not to do it. It's all about that next step. What are the repercussions on whether you do it or whether you don't? So that was a good story about a very good success story. Now here's an opposite story. We were called into one of the large printing companies in the United States. We met with the CEO. He was talking about undergoing the audit, and he said, well, obviously it's going to cost the firm money. I'm not sure if I want to invest this money. A large regulatory agency out here, this is in Southern California, is asking me to undergo this audit, but I really don't know if I want to spend the money to do it. So what ended up happening is he was actually tripping over dollars while chasing pennies. He did not perform the audit. What happened is the regulatory agency pulled all of their work out of this printing company, switched it over to a different printing company that actually has these SOC 2. We actually did a SOC 2 audit for that printing company as well, and now that other printing company has picked up all that business. So you can see he lost a significant amount of work because he did not undergo this audit. Another story, we have a client that gave us a call. They had a client of theirs. They were doing business with them for 30 years, a 30-year business relationship. Out of the blue, their client called them and asked them for the SSAE 16 audit. And they said, well, we don't have the SSAE 16 audit. And they said, well, if you don't have the SSAE 16 audit within 30 days, we're going to have to sever our relationship because it's something that's been rolled out from our internal compliance department. All of our vendors need the SSAE 16. So we received a phone call from this company. They said, is this even possible to do in 30 days? And we said, by golly, yes it is, if we're all willing to sprint like Usain Bolt. So let's get in the blocks and let's start sprinting. And what happened is we actually met the deadline by performing a readiness assessment, piggybacked by a Type 1 audit within that 30-day period for them to keep that business relationship. They now do the Type 2 audit, and they have that business relationship through today.
Yeah, and that's a great example of a situation where, and I know we've all experienced this, where we know somebody at a company and we've been working with Joe over at company XYZ for 20-plus years, 30 years. Well, Joe's not going to do that to us. Well, what if Joe leaves, or what if something happens to Joe, or there's a new sheriff in town, as they say. You never know what happens when you get new boards of directors on board, and they really understand that this audit exists, and this audit is a fantastic way to credentialize any company by using an independent CPA firm to perform the audit. So again, just to mirror what Tim said and what Cynthia said earlier, this decision as to whether to do the audit it's management's decision. It's management deciding whether or not they want to invest the funds in their operation. All we can tell you today is that our existing clients have benefited immensely by going through these audits. And it's a bit of a expense, if you will, but it comes back in multiples. So with that, Cynthia, if you could switch us over to the next slide, that'd be great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the key considerations when undergoing the SSAE 16 audit. The first one here, internal controls are a major component and make the process simpler. What we're talking about here is when you have good internal controls in place within your organizations, what that does is it creates a standardized process versus a process that's not standardized, or something that you have to try to figure out over again and do it differently. So when you have standard processes, what that does is it really helps with onboarding new employees and just making sure that everybody's doing the same thing consistently. And if you have a key employee that leaves and leaves with that tribal knowledge and that standard process is not documented, then that tends to be a problem. So the establishing such internal controls in companies, especially small companies, it's really a benefit for small businesses. A lot of smaller businesses think, I don't need to document my policies or my procedures. That's just for the big guys. No, I tell you what, it's really, really beneficial for the smaller companies. Next point here, not all internal controls are included. What we're talking about here is not every internal control that you have within your organization is going to be included in the audit. The only controls that will be included in the SSAE 16 audit will be those controls that impact or support the services that you are providing your customers. So that's a key point. A lot of people think, they're look into this, that, and the other, and I don't want them looking into this. Well, no, it's really something that is impacting the services that you provide your customers. So let's look at the three major phases of the audit. And these three phases they're all important. Probably the first phase is the most important phase, which is the readiness assessment. And we'll go into each of these in further slides in the presentation. But the readiness assessment really does help a company get ready for the audit. And the next point, the Type 1 audit, and then following that would be the Type 2 audit. And the Type 2 audit is really just something that happens on an annual basis. So once you do a readiness assessment and a Type 1 audit, you really never have to go through the readiness assessment or the Type 1 audit ever again, unless there's a major change in your business operations or you've acquired another company, another line of business. Then you may want to come in and do the readiness assessment, help us identify controls. Oh, next slide, please. Oh, okay. So the readiness assessment. So what the readiness assessment does is it allows our firm to really work collaboratively with your management team and to identify, the first thing that we do is we understand the services that you're providing your customers. So once we identify what those services are, we apply Murphy's Law here. We get very negative. We start asking ourselves, what could go wrong? What risks exist out there? And we'll bounce those risks off of management, off your team members, to really make sure that we've addressed all those risks. Because as we mentioned earlier, these audits are risk-based audits. So we need to make sure that we do identify all the critical risks. And so what it does is it helps us gain more knowledge about your processes and applicable internal controls to mitigate those risks.
Yeah, absolutely. So the readiness assessment, think of us coming in with our consulting hats on as opposed to our auditor hats. And that's critical because as a CPA firm, we must maintain our independence within your audit. So we cannot cross that independence barrier or line or threshold. For example, we cannot tell you, you have to have this policy in place. We'll create this policy and it's yours. And then we go back and we audit that policy. Can't be done. We have impaired our independence. So it's critical as a CPA firm that we walk that fine line of not impairing our independence while providing a lot of value to the process. So that readiness assessment is highly recommended for every company that goes through this audit their very first time, and it's only done once. You never have to do it again. So the nice thing about the escrow and the title industry is, specifically for escrow industry, instead of us coming in and say, okay, let's identify some processes, let's identify some high-level control objectives, the EIC has already done this with their 6 policies and procedures. So that makes life a lot easier. You know what to expect on your end. We can provide guidance better, faster, cheaper that way. So it allows you to get through that process more smoothly than you otherwise would have.
So with respect to the audit and the readiness assessment, a lot of times we talk with client prospects and they really have a misconception as to the time and the resources that are needed to complete the audit. When working with our firm, what they'll find is that the time and the internal resources needed are much less than what they expect. And a lot of times companies will tell us, well, we're not even sure if we're ready for a readiness assessment. And it's an interesting question, because if you haven't gone through the audit before, how would you know, or how would these people know if they're ready or not? What would they look for to make that determination? Both of those are really difficult questions if you don't know what to look for or what the benchmark is that you're trying to achieve. So we always tell our client prospects, let us come in, we'll work with you, we'll ensure that you get ready for the audit, rather than you trying to figure it out. And a lot of times it ends up in a lot of spinning of wheels and lost internal resource time.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim, because you have the hard costs associated with the readiness assessment and you have the soft costs. The hard cost, obviously, is what it takes to bring an accounting firm in to perform the readiness assessment. The soft cost is really the time and energy that you take internally to complete that readiness assessment. And what we have found in the past is 99.8% of our first-time clients undergo the readiness assessment, and those who don't wish they did, because the costs, those soft costs that they incur by spinning their wheels, greatly exceeds the cost of what it would have taken to bring an accounting firm in that really knows what they're doing to get those controls in place.
Great point. Next slide, please. Okay, I think we've touched on this previously, but just to reiterate, on the Type 1 and the Type 2 audits, both the SSAE 16 and the SOC 2 audits have a Type 1 and a Type 2. And again, the Type 1, think of the letter T, stands for the time. It's a point-in-time audit. So think of a picture. If you're in a movie theater and you're watching a movie, it's just a snapshot of that movie. Whereas the Type 2 covers the entire movie, covers a period of time. And you might be asking the question, well, what period of time are we talking about? What we recommend to our clients is, after performing the readiness assessment, and if they choose to do the Type 1, then you'd have a Type 1 as of a particular date. So let's look at some hypothetical examples here, hypothetical dates. So let's say you were to engage a CPA firm to perform a readiness assessment next week or next month even. You theoretically could be ready to go by the end of March 31st. Have we done quicker than that? Absolutely. In the case that Tim was talking about earlier with the client that needed it done in 30 days, we were working around the clock, and so was the client. But we told them, if you want to walk, we'll walk with you. If you want to sprint, we'll sprint with you. And we did get the audit out within 30 days. So once that Type 1 audit is issued, let's say it's issued as of 3/31/2015, April 1st, the very next day, starts your Type 2 audit period. The Type 2 audit period we recommend for first-time auditees is 6 months. So 6 months of auditable history would need to surpass. So you would go from April 1st through September 30th. And you might be asking yourselves the question, well, what's going on during that time frame? Do we have auditors in here 24/7 eating our donuts and drinking our coffee? No, that's not going to happen. What we do is we typically reach out to you about a month and a half before the period end date. So in this particular case, we would reach out to you around mid to late August, and we would schedule a kickoff meeting and work with you to identify what the controls are and provide you with a document request list of the items that we would need to test. So once you go through the audit the first time, then we recommend a 12-month annual cycle. So you would have an audit covering, the next audit would cover October 1st of 2015 through September 30th of 2016, and on and on and on. So just wanted to bring that point home. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the benefits of the SSAE 16 audit. And we've talked about it before, that it really does provide a great return on your investment. It will help you meet whatever requirements that you might be facing with various financial services companies or lenders out there. It certainly enhances your marketing effectiveness, provides that extra layer of credibility to your customers that you've gone through the audit, you've been independently reviewed and evaluated by a CPA firm. It provides you with a competitive advantage. If you're responding to an RFP, a request for proposal, and you're going up against firms that have the audit and you don't, then you kind of have the short stick on that point. We like to say that it's an invite to the dance. So if you, in a lot of cases, if you don't have the SSAE 16 audit under your belt, you may not even be able to respond to the RFP. Or if you do respond, one of the questions would be, do you have an SSAE 16? If the answer is no, then typically they're not even looking at you. And what we found with these audits is they used to be nice to haves, and they're now almost becoming need to haves in order to stay competitive in the marketplace. And at the end of the day, I guess the intangible benefit here is that it does improve the internal control environment within your operations. And there's one other point that I wanted to make on the benefits here of the SSAE 16 audit. You know, at some point, business owners of escrow companies or any company, they have an exit strategy. So what is that strategy going to be? Is the strategy, are you planning to sell the business? Well, if you're planning to sell the business, having that SSAE 16 audit under your belt and having those improved control procedures could really help you sell your business faster and potentially for a larger amount of money, since you can now prove that you've got a good, steady set of internal controls that have been operating effectively year after year. So that's option one if you are a business owner for an exit strategy. Option two for the exit strategy is maybe you might want to decide to hand it down to one of your children or a family member. And at that point, wouldn't it be nice to be able to hand down a well-oiled machine to your son or daughter or family member that you choose to ensure that the business goes on and on and on. So again, there's plenty of benefits with the SSAE 16 audit, and we just wanted to point those out. Next slide, please.
Now, this is probably the most important point that we want to make here, and it's probably the question you've been dying to hear us answer, is what in the world is this going to cost us to go through this audit? You know, put us through the ringer, what's it going to be? And the truth is, it varies on various factors, and it truly makes sense to call a qualified CPA firm to figure out whether it's right for you and what's right for you. So whether you're doing the Type 1 audit or the Type 2 audit, what's the best approach, the size and complexity of your company, how many locations are in scope, the number of control objectives and control activities. That's nice for Escrow and Title because you have EIC model policies and procedures. For ALTA, you have the best practices framework, so that can be clearly defined up front. But if I was to give a high-level cost of this, I would say it could be anywhere. It's a range, and it's a range of these factors, anywhere as low as $10,000 or anywhere as high as in excess of $100,000. We've done audits before that are over $250,000 for multi-billion-dollar companies, and we've done audits at less than $10,000 for small, non-complex companies. Of course, depending on which services you choose, there's bundle pricing discounts. We as a firm understand that it's a significant investment for companies, and we're willing to work with these companies. Certainly, if you have a relationship with our RBJ, and RBJ has been kind enough to host us on this webinar, we can talk about that relationship with RBJ and see if we can put together a bundle discount based on that relationship. So there's multiple factors to be taken into consideration, but you may be pleasantly surprised. It is going to be more cost-effective than you may otherwise have realized. Another point is, depending on what services you choose, that's not going to be a one lump sum payment. You're not going to have to take your pen out and write a $10,000 check. That may be spread out over 8-9 months, so you can best control cash flow. So there's multiple ways that we like to work with our clients. We want to make it affordable. We want to work with our clients over a long period of time. We understand that we're running short on time here, so if you have questions, our intent was to answer some questions on the back end of this, but if you have questions, please submit those questions, and we'll get those answered and back to you. But regarding costs, it may be more affordable, and we want to talk to Cynthia over RBJ because she has gone through this process, and we can sit here and preach back and forth about the SSAE 16 audit and what you should expect, but it probably makes sense to bring Cynthia in to really talk about what she experienced during the audit.
Okay, so let me just say that the auditing experience was far less traumatizing than technical difficulties during a webinar. But with that said, the scope of our audit covered controls relating to information technology, computer controls such as logical and physical security, computer operations, change management, availability and recovery, as well as business processes that covered controls based on the services that we provide. Because of the service industry we fall under, rather than us getting the SOC 1 and the SOC 2, we received the SOC 1 with elements of the SOC 2 so that we have just one report covering all of our needs. Similar to what Jim and Tim had spoke about earlier, that you don't necessarily need 2 reports, so you don't need to pay for 2 reports. Let's see, were the audits delivered timely? Creating the reports was a work in progress. Creating it for the type 1 was especially time consuming. But once the wording was finalized, the reports were delivered timely. As far as the impact to our company, the impact to our company affected several people. The primary impact fell on me because I was the one that organized the entire audit and those involved with it. I imagine that the impact a company would expect would depend on the size of the audit, but nevertheless, a company planning on going through such an audit must prepare to dedicate some time and resources to meet the requirements of the audit. As far as the guidance is concerned, the guidance offered was terrific. I personally had never gone through anything like this, and so I valued all the guidance that Jim and Tim provided us along the way. They truly made the process very easy. How would you describe the benefits RBJ received and compare to the cost? Prior to RBJ choosing to go through the audit, we had received several calls from clients concerned that new regulatory requirements would reach their service providers. And in fact, we had one client require that we do, in fact, get our SSAE 16 audits. When we made the decision to go through with it, it was important for us to ensure our clients that we had taken every precaution, for example, to protect our clients' confidential information and things of that nature. Those controls on our audit resulted in things such as a clean desk policy, secured encrypted email, and background checks for every employee, which are all good things. However, the audit experience provided us much more than assurances that we can offer our clients. For a company such as ours that has been in business for 30 years, with staff who has been here for as long as most of us, and some as long as 30 years, Like many companies, we fell into doing things by knowledge and not necessarily by policy. When we were required to create policy and review them on a continual basis, that made our company run even more effectively. So with that said, we appreciated all the audit processes done for RBJ, but most importantly, when a client is aware of what an SSAE 16 is, we are proud to say that we have it, and that as a service provider to our customer, we have their back. With that, covers my final thoughts. Gentlemen, do you have anything further to add before we close?
No, I think if we can go to that final page here, Cynthia will go past a couple of these slides, and I think it's important to note that if you have additional questions on our website, go ahead and go to that final slide, Cynthia. If you have any questions whatsoever, here is the email address of Jim and myself. Here's our personal extensions to the company. Feel free to give us a call. We'd love to talk to you. We really take pride in educating our clients. And lastly, you'll see down there that last bullet point is a free white paper on the website. So if you go to our website and navigate to industries, title, and escrow companies, there'll be a white paper that you can download. It will cover a lot of the information that was covered on this call, but really give you some fingertip information that you will be able to have as a resource just in case you have to talk to some of your clients about this, in case you have to talk to some lenders, in case you have to talk to your boss about this. You'll have that fingertip information available at your ready whenever you need this. Again, we were hoping to answer some of these questions, but please feel free to submit your questions either directly to Cynthia, to Jim, or myself, and we will definitely get back to you, and we really appreciate your time.
I understand that we are out of time now as far as the specified time. Tim and Jim, we do have some questions. For those who do want to remain on the line, can you spare a few more minutes to answer a few questions?
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
sure.
For those of you who did submit questions that we don't get to, I promise you we will address your questions with you directly. But for those of you who want to stay on the line to listen to questions, please do so. One question came through that says, for multi-branch offices, do you need to pay an on-site visit to each branch location?
That's a great question, and something that certainly does impact the cost. The answer there really depends on, it depends, and here's why it depends. It depends on the controls that really require testing. So for example, if there are servers that contain production information, production servers that are stored at multiple branch offices, then absolutely we would need to go to those branches to inspect and observe the physical security, environmental security controls with respect to those servers. Now, if there are, what I would suggest though, for those controls that are more broad-based, that when we do the testing, that we would select a sample, and the sample would include transactions from each and every branch within the escrow company.
Okay, great. Okay, another question says, can my own CPA perform the audit?
Another great question. Any licensed CPA firm can perform the SSAE 16 audit. The thing is, it's a highly specialized audit. So if you, for example, let's say you have a firm that specializes in tax or financial statement auditing, many times they'll pass on the SSAE 16 audit because you need a combination of an IT background to identify those IT general computer controls, and you need a background of business process internal controls. And when we're talking about internal controls, it's more specialized than simply ticking and tying numbers. It's diving into business processes, understanding business processes, risks associated with those business processes. So something that pops to the top of my head is, if you're a CPA firm that says you do everything, it's kind of like a handyman that you want to call and fix a faucet. But what happens if you want to build a pool? Are you going to call your handyman to build the pool, dig a hole, and plumb all the fixtures? Probably not. You probably want to go with a pool building company, somebody who specializes in that type of service. So it's one of those jacks of all trades, master of none, if you will. So we recommend going with a firm that performs, quite frankly, at least 50 of these audits a year. Because if you get anything less, You'll likely run into some capacity issues at that firm. Their folks may be taken up and may not be able to get to your audit for a couple months. And you really run into that lack of expertise that, quite frankly, can cost you a lot more money in terms of soft costs to your particular environment.
Okay, another question that came through that says, does your firm accept payments?
Oh, in terms of our billing procedures, absolutely. What we find a lot of our clients like is a monthly billing cycle. So typically what we would do is spread the cost of the audit over an 8-month to a 9-month process. So that's typically how long it takes to get from the readiness assessment through the Type 1, if the Type 1 is selected, and all the way through to the completion of the Type 2. The other thing to note is that our audits are performed on a fixed fee basis, so you know exactly what you're going to be paying every month, so it's easier for budgeting purposes.
Yeah, I think that fixed fee is an important note. It's not like a time and materials audit where a company may quote a low price and come in and start racking up hours, and you're billing for all these hours, you're billing for expenses, you're billing for steak dinners at Ruth's Chris. It's not like that. These are fixed fee engagements. It's really to protect you. If the scope of the audit is not properly scoped, well, guess what? Whose fault is that? It's a CPA firm's fault. Why should you be penalized and paying extra fees if it wasn't scoped properly?
Okay, great. Okay, and here's a very important question that I think probably everybody would want to know. If I get the SSAE 16, will that mean I'm CFPB compliant?
That's a very good question as well. That's a slippery slope. And the only one who can truly say is if you're in compliance with CFPB regulations is the CFPB themselves. Now, they can provide guidance and put guidance out there, but you'll never find the CFPB saying, if you do this, then you will be compliant. They'll merely provide guidance. So what we've seen in the marketplace is CFPB has provided guidance. The lenders have particularly liked to adopt the SSAE 16 for the flexibility that it allows. They've adopted their own frameworks, the AIC model policies and procedures, ALTA best practices framework. So what we like to say is, if you undergo the audit and you comply with whatever framework that you're really developing the audit around, who can say that you're not compliant? And who can say that if you're following EIC model policies and procedures, Company A, Company B is following EIC model policies and procedures? Well, guess what? It should be that both are in compliance. The CFPB can't really pick and choose who's in compliance and who's not, as long as the entire industry is kind of marching in the same direction.
Okay, good. Another question that came in that I'll answer is, does this pertain to BRE divisions? As much as it pertains to the DBO, it has to do with a compliancy issue that settlement agents have to fall under. So this would be far-reaching to any settlement agent if they so chose to adapt to the audit process. Somebody asked, can we advertise that we are SSAE 16? I can answer this too. Yes. Once you pass your audit, you get permission to use the SOC logo. There's restrictions on the permission, but for example, you can put it on your website. Tim and Jim, did you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, let's be quite honest here. If you're going to spend the time and the money to undergo this audit, you want a return on investment, plain and simple. This is not only a compliance initiative, but this is almost a marketing initiative. You want to be able to build your business and use this as a way to build your business. So from the marketing side, these reports are known as restrictive use reports, which means you simply can't scan the report and post it on the website. You cannot do that. But what you can do is provide this report to clients, client prospects, and you can use that logo on all your materials that you put out there. You can, once you go through the audit, you download the material, that logo, put it on your marketing materials. And another great thing that we like to do with our clients is announce through a press release that you've undergone this audit. Everything's on the internet nowadays. If it's on the internet, it's going to live for a very long time. So if somebody does a Google search, they'll likely find the press release that you have undergone this audit, and it could put you in the running to win more work. So It's an effective use of advertising and marketing dollars by undergoing this audit. And it's important. Some companies may be saying, hey, we undergo the SSAE 16 and we undergo the SOC 2, and they may say that company over there only does the SSAE 16. They're completely missing the SOC 2. And it's important to educate the marketplace on how to respond to a question like that. And we can certainly help you draft responses to questions like that and really educate your client prospects on how best to answer.
Yeah, and Tim, to that point, one of the things that we talk with our clients about is the cost of these audits. We really suggest that you look at the cost not as a cost for compliance, but really as a marketing cost, because if it's just a compliance cost, there's really not much of a return on cost for compliance. But these really are, it does cover compliance, but it's really a great marketing tool as well.
Okay, I think that with that we'll wrap it up. We had a great number of people stay on with us as long as they have up till now, and so we really appreciate that. We thank you for attending, and we hope that you found this time informative. If you have submitted any questions that have gone unanswered, we will absolutely get you those answers. Certainly you are free to contact SSAE 16 professionals directly for a more technical answer, or you are obviously absolutely welcome to contact me as well. I'm going to go ahead and close this session, and thank you again very, very much for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.